Hello everybody, and thank you for joining me for this webinar on training students to speak spontaneously, read aloud and transcribe, which is particularly relevant for the new GCSE, which will first be examined in England in 2026. The aims of our session are to look at how to teach phonics effectively, how we can ensure that students can practice applying their phonic knowledge and then receive feedback, both immediate and by the teacher. Also, how we can teach students to speak spontaneously using group talk methodology. And finally, how we can assess students' speaking skills effectively. I'd like to start with the Ofsted MFL Research Review of June 2021. This looked at a variety of research and talked about the importance of 3 pillars of progression when you plan your curriculum: phonics, vocabulary, and grammar. Now, vocabulary and grammar have been around for a long time, and probably lots of teachers are very familiar with these, and you've probably already planned your curricula around this. However, phonics is something relatively new, and it was actually only mentioned in an official document, as it were, for the first time by Ofsted in 2021. Phonics is defined as the system of sounds of a language and how these are represented in written words. And it's really important that in order to train students to have clear and reliable pronunciation, that they learn the links between sound and spelling. So these should be an integral part of second language learning, and they need to happen early on in the language learning journey. I would suggest after a few weeks of having taught the language for the first time. So students do need a little bit of language to hook their learning to. So if you are teaching, for example, students in year 7 at secondary school, I would suggest starting the actual teaching of synthetic phonics, step by step, phoneme by phoneme, week by week, after half term in October. I'm going to go into more detail about how you could do this. The Ofsted review also said that curriculum plans need to show clear logic behind progression, including around when to teach particular phonemes. So you would have to choose which phonemes you're going to teach to begin with, and you'd have to have a rationale. And it also says that planned practice and review of phonemes and how to link these to graphemes should be in place. So we will have a look at this as part of our webinar today. And then for the first time ever, the new GCSE specifications came out in January 2022, and it said that for the first time that students will be tested on how they learn and apply the principles by which spelling represents sounds in standard or widely used forms of the language. And therefore, as a result, they need to undertake dictation of short spoken extracts. And I will say dictation, it's not the first time that has been examined. In 1987, I was the last year to take the old O-level qualification, and we did have a short dictation, which was part of that. And probably for many years, teachers have still included dictation in the way they teach languages, and it's a very good way of testing whether students can make the sound spelling link, but also testing their spelling of vocabulary and their knowledge of grammar. So if you say, for example, je suis allé, they would need to know that allé is spelt at the end with an E acute accent, and not with another form that would sound the same, such as EZ at the end. And that would be part of their knowledge of how to form the perfect tense in French. So we're just going to do a little bit of interactive thinking now. So have a think, and can you think to yourself, what is a phoneme? Can you give an example of one in English, and perhaps one in French, Spanish, or German, whichever language or languages you teach? So a phoneme is the smallest single identifiable unit of sound. We've got some examples here in English: sh, s, o, OUGH, which can actually be pronounced in 7 different ways in English, just an example of how difficult English is to learn for non-native speakers. So it could be pronounced uff as in tough, o as in dough, ow as in bow, oo as in through, or as in thought, for example. And then we have p, luckily only pronounced one way in English. In French, we've got wa, the nasal sound a, the O sound, which could be written in 3 different ways, so that's 3 different graphemes, the on sound, which could be written in 2 different ways, the ch and the soft sh sound. And in Spanish, we've got a, y, ps, o, ny, ch. And in German, I, sp, st, y. So, can you segment the words lapin in French, and can you tell me how many phonemes it has? You might want to pause this video and have a think if this is part of your training. Maybe perro in Spanish and vifil in German. How many phonemes do each of these words have? Well, we have 4 for lapin, we have 4 for perro, we have 5 for vifil. So hopefully you can see that it's not to do with the number of letters or consonants a word has, it's to do with the actual unit of sound. There are 44 phonemes in English. In French, which has less phonemes, there are 36. In Spanish, which is 99% phonetic, there are even less, there's only 25. And German has 44 phonemes. We don't need to teach every single French, Spanish or German phoneme. And let's have a think which from your experience are the most difficult for English learners. A good way to do this, and this is a nice activity to do with your older learners, to focus on the differences, particularly with cognates. So students often mispronounce cognates or neocognates because they recognise the word and it's similar to English, and they might pronounce it with English pronunciation, forgetting all their carefully learned rules of pronunciation. So a nice thing to do is for you to say the English pronunciation of the word and then the target language. So you might say agent, agent, euro, euro, chocolate, chocolat, prince, prince, rugby, rugby, dragon, dragon. And ask the students to draw out and tell you which are the phonemes that are very different. And in English, it would be the O sound, for example, that nasal sound and the silent T, the E sound in euro, the H, the soft sh in chocolat, the in prince, the U sound in rugby, the E sound at the end of rugby, the Y is pronounced as an E, and then the O sound in dragon. And you can do the same with the Spanish here. We've got some examples, agente, euro, an example there in Spanish where you pronounce every single letter, every single vowel. So it's euro. Chocolate, you pronounce every single letter. So the E at the end of chocolate is pronounced príncipe. You've got that th sound. I was pronouncing it according to Castilian Spanish, but if you were teaching South American Spanish, it would obviously be príncipe, and so on. And then we've got similar in German, and we can pull out some of the most difficult phonemes in each language by doing this. So I would suggest these are the most difficult phonemes or rules of pronunciation. So I've included in French, you've got the silent letter rule, especially at the ends of words, and the liaison rule where you do pronounce letters that are usually silent when they're followed by a vowel. You've got the Spanish phonemes as well, that are the key ones, and the German ones there as well that are most difficult. And for the first time ever, our new GCSE MFL specifications actually lists the phonemes that students should learn in French, Spanish and German. So in French, we've got these, all of them ones that we're looking at. So we're not looking at all 36, we're just looking at the key phonemes and then these rules around liaison and silent letters. In German, we've got the differences between the long and short vowels, which is a key thing to remember, and of course our umlauts as well. And in Spanish, we've got vowels, and then we've got the sort of SanakoUK, the rule, and the gagogu, rule, which is sort of nice rules around our C's and our J's and how we pronounce them according to which vowel is followed by that letter. And according to the recent Ofsted training materials around MFL, what Ofsted would see as a strength is direct and systematic teaching of phonics. And this is very much linked to how phonics is taught in English primary schools to help children to learn to read and write. as evidence shows that it is the most reliable method for assuring that pupils achieve accurate pronunciation and reading and spelling. And this teaching needs to be based on a clear understanding of the phonics of the language being taught, including the effect accents have on pronunciation and the influence of grammar on sounds and spellings. And various exercises can feature as part of a planned approach to phonics, such as note-taking, dictation, and reading aloud. What Ofsted would see as a weakness around the teaching of phonics is that little thought is given to teaching phonological rules and pronunciation. So, for example, sometimes pupils do not have enough phonic knowledge to read unfamiliar words with appropriate pronunciation and know how to apply phonic knowledge to spell words. For example, do Year 8 and Year 9 students mispronounce kel and maybe say quell and et, which is quite common. And that also, if there's no systematic approach taken to teaching the pronunciation of phonics, and that will be where teachers would say, oh, well, when I come across a word or a sound in a word, I practice it. So if they come across toi, and they practice the wa sound and the silent s, but that's not a systematic way of teaching it. A systematic way is where you choose a particular phoneme, you teach it through a series of different activities, ideally once a week, systematically, and you go back and repeat, reinforce, do some of that reinforcement teaching. So you're not just teaching it once, that they are coming across it again, and that will be systematic phonics teaching. So good practice in terms of this systematic teaching would be to review any previously taught phonemes, to ask pupils to identify any words they know with the focus phoneme in, to do some micro-listening activities where students listen to individual words and say which have the focus phoneme in, or listen to a rhyme or song and tally the number of phonemes. Then they would do some speaking, perhaps a rhyme or a tongue twister with lots of examples of the focus phoneme in, using a model to practice. They would then do some speaking where they would read aloud unknown words or phrases, and then lots of guided and independent practice through games and tools which provide feedback on pronunciation. So I'm going to show you an example of what this could look like in the classroom, and then we can see how the Sanaco Connect software can support students with all of these activities, and in particular with the independent practice and providing tools which give them feedback. So it's really important that we've got a clear sequence. So a suggestion for French, starting H22 stands for half term 2. In Year 7, this is what it could look like. We've got some of our most highly frequent phonemes early on. We've got meaning or one, the most highly frequent word in the French language. We've got the soft sh sound because it's part of je, and they would use that a lot. We've got the QUK sound, because that is in lots of question words and they come across that quite early on. And you do need to get the silent letter rule in early before they start making mistakes and mispronouncing. We also need to think about assessment of phonic knowledge. This is something similar to the NCEL types of assessment for Year 7, and I like it in the sense that students just fill in missing letters at this point. So they're not filling in full words, and the missing letters have the focus key phonemes in that they've been learning. And this will be a reading aloud activity, again, mirroring what the students eventually will have to do at GCSE, where they'll have to read aloud an unknown paragraph of around 35 words for foundation and 50 words for higher. But at this level, just in Year 7, they would just be reading single words, and they'd be focusing on the key underlined sections, which is the focus phoneme or phonemes or rules of pronunciation. So let's have a look at something. I have developed this type of method. It's called Phonic Planets, and the French version is Les Planètes Phoniques. The Spanish version is Planetas Fonéticos, and the German is Phonetic Planeten. And if you're interested in more details about this, you can get this from speakeasy.net, which is speakeasy.net, and you can see lots of examples and have a go using this in your lessons if you're interested. So we'd start with a review of previous phonemes and words that students would have come across, and ask students to pronounce these accurately.
Can you think of any words with the wa sound in?
So the next activity is to help students to think about words and group them according to sound rather than topic, which is usually what they're used to. Ideally, if you're doing this in a French language classroom, you might have a displays around the classroom, and in which case I would ask students to shut their eyes or put their head in their hands because you just want them to think about the sound, not to go reading this particular OI grapheme. So let's have a think of any words if we think that they might have learned maybe greetings, maybe numbers 1 to 10, maybe parts of the body, perhaps some foods, perhaps colours. What sort of words do you think students would say? We then go and visit La Planète Oie.
La planète Oie.
And we go and see what words will come up on our planet. So only things that have the wa sounding can be found on our fictional planet.
3. Croissant.
Noir,
Poisson. Oiseau.
Okay, we might give a merit point to students who got any of those words right. And when they do give you those words, it's a good idea to write the word on the board and to draw a square around the focus grapheme. Now with wa in French, there's only one way to write that, but there are other sounds like the on sound or the o sound where there could be different ways to write it. And so that will highlight the fact that you can write that sound in different ways. We would then ask students to very simple micro listening activity level to listen to 2 words or phrases and say which one has the wa sound in. It's a good idea for these not to be words that the students would know already because we don't necessarily want them to think about meaning at this stage. We just want them to focus on sound, which is a micro listening skill. So I'll just show you a couple of these as examples.
La Côte d'Ivoire. Le Cameroun.
So hopefully you heard that it was the first one, and we can then listen and read again this time and check.
La Côte d'Ivoire. Le Cameroun. Marie-France. François.
So again, we've got 2 this time, 2 proper names. Hopefully you heard it was the second one. We can check again. This could also be as students get better at this over time, it could be a song or a rhyme where they do a tally of the number of times they hear a sound. And it might sound quite difficult, and in fact, students do find it hard at first, but if you persevere, they get really good at it. And it's a really good way to help tune their ears into listening to French and to differentiating different sounds and therefore different words when they hear speech more quickly. We would then get students to practice doing some speaking now. So we'd give them a rhyme or a tongue twister that would have lots of examples of the focus phoneme in.
une oie, deux oies, trois oies, quatre oies, cinq oies, six oies, sept oies, sept oies.
Okay, so that's a really nice traditional French rhyme. It's all about geese, and traditionally children will point to each other. Une oie, deux oies, trois oies, quatre oies, cinq oies, six oies, sept oies. Or we could give them a tongue twister like this one. And this is one of the most famous French tongue twisters, a bit like she sells seashells on the seashore.
Il était une fois un homme de foi qui vendait du foie dans la ville de Foix.
So I won't play the whole thing, but you get the idea. It's a good idea before students practice that they will have listened to it over and over again a few times. And when I show you some of the activities that you can do with Summerco Connect, they would have a chance to listen to this a few times before they had a go at practicing their own pronunciation. And then finally, good practice is to give them the chance to read aloud new words that have got the focus phoneme in, and then possibly some other previously learnt phonemes. For example, here in boisson, we've got the on sound. And in that way, they are practicing the read aloud skill, but just as a very simple level to begin with, a word level, before we move to sentence and text level. So I would give them 10 seconds in pairs, have a go at saying those words to each other, and then let's have a listen and see if we were correct.
Moi, toi, boisson, victoire, soir, joie.
So hopefully you get the idea. And there's a series of Phonic Planets activities in French. There's 25 different activities for French. I think there's around 34 in German and 25 in Spanish. And they all follow a similar idea. They've all obviously got their own tongue twisters and songs and rhymes, but they help you to systematically focus on a particular phoneme and teach it. So that's from the speakeasy.net website. So we're going to look now at how we can practice applying phonic knowledge and receive feedback, both immediate and by the teacher. And I'm now going to share my screen as a student, and I'm going to go into a phonic activity. So I'm just going to reshare my screen differently now. So what we have now is an activity focusing on the sound. And here students would have a chance to listen to a series of words with the sound in. And then they would have to fill in the gaps. And you can see here, I've had a go at doing this previously based on what we hear. And we could listen to it as many times as we want to. We could also listen to a rhyme and have a go at doing a tally of the number of times we hear the sound, and we would type in our answer here where it says 6, how many. And then we can also have a listen to a tongue twister and have a go at pronouncing it correctly. And then finally, we can listen to some new words with the sound in and have a go at typing them below. And then when we've completed everything, we click on the submit button to send it off, and then the teacher would be able to have a look at what the students have answered, both the gap fill activity, which will be marked automatically by the computer, the tallying of the number of sounds would be automatically marked, the mark that the student got from recording their voice doing the tongue twister, teacher will be able to both listen to what the student has recorded, or if they've re-recorded it a few times to improve it, the teacher could listen to what they've recorded, see the number of stars that they were given, and the teacher would also see the transcription, the words that they've listened and had a go at typing in. So there's lots of really nice time-saving activities there for the teacher. And just to show you what the pronunciation tool looks like, if I go to start, I've just typed in Je suis anglaise, and I'm going to listen to an example. I can choose whether I prefer a male or female voice. So I'm going to prefer the female, and I'm going to prefer a slightly slower speed. So I'm going to go at 0.75, and hopefully that is going to be a bit slower for me.
Je suis l'anglaise.
Okay, and then when I click on pronounce, I'm going to have a go at pronouncing it. I'm not sure how this is going to work because I'm also projecting this on Zoom, so it might sound a little bit odd, but we'll give it a go. Je suis anglaise. So luckily it likes my pronunciation. That's fantastic. And I get myself 5 stars, and I can play my tape, see if I'm happy with it. And then I can click submit, and the teacher will listen to that. So going back to our presentation, I would just like to reiterate that phonics research shows is the best way to teach pronunciation in languages. And we've got a couple of quotes here from Pinker saying that reading is not natural. Children are wired for sound, but print is an optional accessory. So making that sound spelling link in terms of what it reads like, it must be painstakingly bolted on and taught. And also Kathy Russell, who recently spoke at Research Ed in Oxford in November 2022, and is a highly respected professor who's focused all her life on phonics, says that phonics is not just a method, it's a vital part of the curriculum. You either teach it directly and well, you can't just assume students are just going to work it out, or you force them to work it out for themselves. And if you do, it will take a lot longer. Kathy Russell recently did a piece of work, an experiment with a group of adults, and half of them were taught the phonics, the pronunciation of a made-up new language. It only took 3% of their whole learning time, over 18 hours. The other half were not taught it at all and had to work it out. Nearly all of the adults could then pronounce, who had the direct and systematic teaching, could pronounce the language properly. I think 95% of them could, but only 25% of the adults worked out the rules of phonics of that made-up language and could actually pronounce it properly. And it only took 3% of the teaching time. So it means that the time that we invest in it is small. It must happen in the first year of learning a language, but that time you've invested will pay great dividends later on. But it's so important that this is hammered home and that students feel really secure with their pronunciation. And I suggest having enough independent practice to be able to do that as well. So in summary, we need to choose which phonemes and pronunciation rules we're going to teach, add them into our scheme of work. Ideally, I'd say once a week in Year 7. Choose the resources that you want for teaching and practicing them, and then apply a systematic practice and review schedule, including guided and independent practice. And something like the Summerco Connect phonics activities could be set to students as homework as well. They can open these and do these activities on their phone. It doesn't require a login. The students just are given a web link to get onto that particular lesson activity, and they type their name in, they answer the questions, they listen, they pronounce, they submit their work. As I said, it could be on their phone, it could be on a tablet, laptop, anything. Makes it a lot easier, and there's a lot less excuses for students saying I couldn't access anything to be able to do my homework. And it would allow that systematic practice, which is so important, and the opportunity to get that independent feedback without a teacher having to listen and say, oh yeah, that was good pronunciation. The computer gives them that feedback, and so they can practice and improve independently. And then eventually we do need to assess that phonic knowledge, and as they're practicing, you can assess it through these interactive activities which get submitted. And obviously you would ideally create some phonic activities in your end of year assessments. For example, in listening, they could do some transcription by the individual words or just parts of words, like in the example I showed you. And in the speaking, they should ideally read aloud some words and eventually some phrases and sentences over time. I'm now going to look at how we can teach students to speak spontaneously using group talk methodology. I was struck by this tweet from Vincent Everett last week, where he says that time and again in their feedback, pupils understand they are learning to develop how they can speak and write, learn the grammar and the vocabulary, but what they really want is to learn to introduce themselves and have a conversation. And for so many students, and I've been teaching languages now for 27 years, they equate being good at a language with being able to speak it, because quite normally they see the fact that if they met somebody from that country and they could have even a simple conversation, get themselves understood and understand most of what was being said, that would equate to being reasonably okay at that language. If they can read it and write it, they don't see that as being as important. So it's probably one of the hardest skills to teach and practice, but it is the one that is the most important in the sense that it gives students that feeling of self-efficacy in a language. The Ofsted Research Review does talk about the fact that students' use of the language is essential, and there is evidence that it correlates with learning. It requires competence and the motivation to create meaning. And it will often be less fluent, less accurate and slower when it's unrehearsed. And the new GCSEs are now taking us towards a way where we can't rehearse and practice set answers to set questions. That has happened so much in the current GCSE. Students do need to be able to listen to a question that they don't particularly know in advance is coming and be able to reply to it. So they're not going to be saying reams and reams of things that they've just memorized off by heart. They will be saying less, they'll sound less fluent, they'll probably hesitate more, they'll be less accurate and slower, and obviously the mark schemes do need to reflect that as well. So most of the new speaking exam will be unprepared. And so we do need to think right from Year 7, how are we practicing and giving students the confidence to have spontaneous and unprepared group talking activities. And we do need to make sure that the most frequent language is revisited and focused on, and then bit by bit made more complex over time. So the new GCSE means we can no longer get pupils to write and memorise a series of set questions. I, for one, I've taught bottom sets in Year 11 for the last few years, and I'm delighted with that because it's very hard, particularly for the less able, lower prior retaining students to be able to do this. They don't see the point of it, and they find it very cognitively challenging. They often don't want to do it, and they don't really do it. They see it more use learning some things in other subjects. The emphasis can often be misplaced on the completion of a mundane task, and research also shows that retention is aided when practice is skill specific. So we do need to practice in the type of task in which it's required. So we need to make sure students are doing a lot of practice in speaking. So what sort of things are our pupils talking about? It could be things like I'm a celebrity, it could be football, it could be who's won Bake Off, whatever is maybe going on, maybe what YouTubers are doing at the time, or online games. And the group talk project, which was developed by Greg Horton and won an award with the European languages in 2008, is a fantastic project that I used the principles of this between 2011 and 2016 with 2 classes that I took from year 7 to year 11. And they got some of the best speaking results that I've ever had. And I'm absolutely sure it was because we used the group talk methodology consistently. We used it every 2 weeks over the course of 5 years. And it gives students the language of conjecture. It gives them opportunities to think, suppose, and estimate. And the judges of the European Award for Languages were really impressed, particularly because they saw groups of teenage boys talking animatedly in French about things they were interested in: sport, cars, school uniforms. And the conversations were organic, and the pupils were clearly not speaking from a script. What's different about it? Well, only the target language is spoken by groups. There's interaction between a small group of pupils. The tasks demand opinion, conjecture, and debate. The language is often colloquial. The responses are spontaneous. It's up to you as a teacher whether you want to say there's no set finishing time. I personally like to have a target, so I might start off with, like, we're all going to talk for 2 minutes. This will be in year 7, 2 minutes non-stop, put a timer on the board, a 2-minute challenge, and then I increase it over time. So I think that challenge idea does work well. This is the group talk progression chart. We've got stage 1 here at the top, which is usually equated with year 7. You've got the sorts of learning outcomes which are around introducing simple opinions, eliciting opinions, expressing simple agreement and disagreement, and some basic colloquialisms like du spinnst, tu rigoles, que va, estás loco. We've got examples in French, German, and Spanish of this. And then we've got stage 2, which is taking part in a small, short discussion, often equated with year 8. So we've got things like formulating basic questions, using more varied opinion openers like je crois que, je suppose que, à mon avis, creo que, ich glaube. And then more varied ways to express agreement and disagreement, like tu as raison, tu as tort, tienes razón, no tienes razón, and so on. And then also some hesitations and time-gaming phrases like alors, bon ben, pues, un momento, a ver. And these are very colloquial, and they make you sound much more French and Spanish and so on. And then moving on to stage 3, often more associated with year 9, we've got giving giving reasons for opinions. We've got eliciting reasons, expressing preferences and eliciting preferences. And also we've got a different time frame here, the future. These are obviously a guide, and you can, of course, change things. You might want to bring the future in. This is the simple future. You might want to bring that in earlier. So we've got phrases like j'aime parce que, which is often a year 7 phrase. Je préfère, je pense que, pourquoi, je veux aller au cinéma, bonne idée. And then finally, we've got stage 4, and that would be key stage 4. So we'll be looking at year 10 and 11 for this, where students have to give a developed response to a stimulus, such as a picture or a paragraph or a sentence, listen to more extended talk, and then respond to key points raised. And here they are using the past tense, the perfect tense, saying tu as dit que, du hast gesagt, hast dicho que. Give a balanced view, so they say on one hand, on the other hand, d'une part, d'autre part, por una parte, pero por otra parte. And then we've even got a subjunctive here in French, bien que ce soit, which will be a set phrase that they would learn. In German, we've got obwohl, which is generally equated with a higher level phrase that would get them really good marks in the speaking exam. So these are just a guide. You could, of course, develop them, and you would obviously have to teach them in class. We've got our stage 1, we've got our stage 2 here. And then what is the way that it works is that students are given a stimulus to talk about. Ideally, you'd have a series of pictures of something that they're interested in. You might have them face down in the middle of the table. This is a school dinner. There's actually a website that I've discovered called Disgusting School Dinners, where students put up pictures of a school dinner, which was horrible. I think this one came from America. But ideally, you want to think about topics and themes that students are interested in talking about, and food is definitely one. You might want to think about maybe football, maybe pictures of different football teams or football players. And I know it's stereotypical, but it is often what boys are interested in. You might want to think about fashion, maybe celebrities, maybe particular TV programs, maybe anything that students are interested in. They're often interested in talking about their teachers. You might want to have names of teachers, although that could be a little bit risque, but obviously they'll be talking in the target language. So there's something to be said for that. So each time the student would lift up a picture, they would say what they think about it. They'd turn to the next student and say, que penses-tu? Tu aimes la photo? And then the student would give their opinion and then turn to another, and so on. So they would all have a chance at giving their opinion. They might go around the other direction. So it's not always the same people starting with the picture. This might be useful for older students, for Key Stage 4. Students are quite interested in talking about the environment. They feel quite passionately about that now, which is obviously fantastic. And I'm going to show you a couple of little video clips of group talk in action in a classroom. This is a Year 8 group of boys who are talking in German about school.
Ich denke, Schüler ist okay. Ja, zustimmt. Nein, Schule ist scheiße. Nein. Ich denke, Sport ist toll, ja. Nein, Sport ist scheiße. Nein, du spinnst. Nein, du spinnst.
Now, the boys did seem very passionate about what they were saying, and they did seem to understand as well. So it felt to me like a proper conversation. What we've got now is a group of Year 11 students talking in Spanish and using some of the higher level phrases that we've seen in Stage 4.
¿Qué haces para mantenerte en forma? Pues yo hago mucho deporte. Juego al baloncesto todos los días, señor.
Has dicho que los deportes son importantes, pero yo creo que una vez la semana es mejor.
Yo estoy de acuerdo cuando dices que el deporte es importante, pero pienso que es más importante relajarse.
Ni hablar. Hacer deporte es muy relajante. Y aunque has dicho que el ejercicio es importante, también se debe comer bien. Así.
And you can see in this one that students were using a speaking mat to support them. And it's a good idea to give them one, but over time you could reduce the amount of support that you provide.
Okay.
So, for example, we've got our 4 stages here of group talk, which we've already had a look at. And what you would need to do if you are thinking about introducing group talk would be to agree as it is a departmental focus and to build some opportunities into existing schemes of work. I would say ideally every 2 weeks. Offer some reinforcement of group talk scenarios and have some resources such as your cue cards and your photos. And it's also a good idea to display group talk phrases in the classroom. You do need to introduce the sentence stems carefully and practice them. And I would also recommend using Summerco Connect as an oral speaking mat and to develop pupils' ability to talk about pictures, first of all independently and then in groups. And with the Summerco Connect software, you can also record the conversations that the students have in groups. And that, I think, will help to keep them on task if they know that after their conversation, you are going to be able to listen to it. And I'll demo that in a minute. So how does it work in practice? You can challenge pupils to have their first ever real conversation in the target language without using any English. You can set a challenge time depending on the ability level of the class, perhaps 3 minutes, maybe 2, if it's year 7s. And then, of course, they would use cue cards and pupils would talk using a group talk support mat if provided. And the group talk project did suggest a short written exercise afterwards, consolidating and showing the transferable nature of the phrases, where pupils would write, I think, opinion statements in the 5 thought bubbles, pass them to another student who then replies and says what they think. And you can, of course, extend this and make it more difficult as students get older by incorporating more advanced language and structures, by using increasingly complex scenarios demanding more balanced views, using picture and text stimuli, allowing for some preparation, just like they would in the GCSE speaking exam, they have some preparation for the photo task, and using some model dialogues, perhaps, and podcasts. And these are something that I'm developing and putting into the Sanaco Connect software. So we can see the impact is very strong. Pupils, especially boys, are motivated to speak. Pupils, as we could see in those videos, talk more confidently and naturally. Their oracy skills and therefore their confidence improves, their questioning skills improve, and as a result, their GCSE speaking tests do improve. So you do need to plan for it, and you also need to choose speaking stimuli which will engage and provoke spontaneous responses. That's really key. So we're going to have a look now at using the Sanaco group talk methodology with Connect. Sorry, the group talk methodology with Sanaco Connect, which I'm now going to show you. So I'm going into the student version of this activity, and I've gone into a task where I've got a picture of a fashion show, and I've got the level 1 phrases here that we could see. So I'm a year 7 student, and I'm going to have a go at listening to these different opinions, and also I can listen to those phrases and I can have a go at recording myself as well. And I've got different levels of opinion, so depending on whether I can manage some level 3 phrases, I could also use that. I'm going to show you what this looks like from the teacher's perspective and how the teacher could launch that activity and make it into a group activity. So going back to sharing my screen. So I'm now in the teacher version of this, and I can go to my class. And when I did this webinar live last week, I had a number of people who joined my class, but they've obviously gone offline now and doing other things. But if I want to launch an exercise, I can choose pair or group discussion. I can choose the group size. So if I want groups of 4, I can choose that. And the computer will split the class into 2 groups of 4 in this case. And at the end of it, when the students have finished discussing the picture that they're going to be talking about, I can end the exercise and tick the collect all student submissions. And that would mean that I would be able to go into the submission section later and listen to all of their conversations. I can also launch an exercise which is describe what you see. And I could select a picture, so I could select the gross school dinner. For example, go to next and launch this. And I could ask students to each describe what they see. And then when they've done that, I can end the exercise and then again collect all the student submissions by ticking that box. It's also a really handy way to do some speaking practice. So I could ask the same question of every student who are on their headsets. I could do this as a speaking exam at the end of the year or a read aloud activity. And I can say something, the students, so I can ask a question. Apologies for that. That's because I've got Zoom on at the same time as me speaking to a class. So I can start recording, I would ask my question, I would leave a gap, maybe 30 seconds, all the students would speak into their headsets, answer that question. We could do that a number of times. We could do it as a role play activity, as a photo card activity, as just some general conversation. It could be a read aloud activity. And then when we're finished, I could click end exercise and again collect all the student submissions. So you can see that what we've got here is a really handy time-saving device for teachers where students can practice the group talk scenarios, but also you as a teacher will be able to go back and listen to what students have done. Right, we're just going to come to the end of this webinar. I'm going to go back and share my PowerPoint last couple of slides. We do know that we've got the read aloud activities, which are part of the new draft specification. So this is an example of what a student would need to read aloud. They get that as part of their activities at the beginning of a speaking exam. They'd be given part of the time to prepare to have a look at that and see how they would pronounce it. Then afterwards, they're going to be asked 4 questions that relate to that particular topic, which is media and technology. And then we've also got dictation activities, and this is an example of, I think, a foundation dictation where students are going to listen to an oral text and they need to fill in the gaps. So what I'm going to do just to finish with now is I'm going to show you in the Summerco Connect software how these can be used, how they read aloud and the dictation activities can be used directly for students. So we've got a GCSE foundation dictation here. And I'm going to preview that so you can see what it will look like for the students. The students would listen to the extract and they would have to fill in the gapped words. This is the teacher version of it, so you can see in red the answers, but let's have a listen.
Foundation dictation. Le soir, il mange des frites avec son ami suisse. Je passe mes grandes vacances à la plage car c'est amusant.
And you can see that I can pause at any time. Is it a nice slow speed? And then I as a student would have a go at filling in the gaps. And obviously the students can replay this either as many times as they like, or you can set that it can only be played twice if you want to make it more of an assessment type of activity. And then equally, we can have a look at a read aloud foundation task. What's happened here? I'll just check what's gone on. I think I've already submitted this, so I do apologise. But what I have here is a series of phrases that are part of a real read aloud task. And the students would then be able to listen to a correct pronunciation, just as I showed you at the beginning. Then they could record their own pronunciation. They could play it back, see if they're happy with it. And they would also get some feedback by the number of stars. And then they could submit this work and you would be able to listen to it. So just to complete this webinar today, I'm really delighted to announce that the Sanako Pronounce is going to be part of the Connect software. It's going to be coming out very soon, and we will be putting that out on social media and letting people who already have Connect know when that is available. And in fact, I'll just show you where you will find it. I've got access to it at the moment on mine, but you won't have access. But when you go to new exercise and click on the exercise options, you'll see down the bottom it says pronounce. You'll select your language, so I could select French, and I can type in some text. So say bonjour, je m'appelle Lucie, j'ai 11 ans. And then I can add that and then select another one if I want. And then that's a pronounce task that has been created. So I do hope that you enjoyed this webinar. Thanks very much for attending, and we'll be in touch again soon about any future webinars and also some face-to-face twilight sessions that we are going to be running. Okay, goodbye.